And NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg will be in Japan today after completing a visit to South Korea.
His trip is aimed at strengthening ties with Asian allies amid Russia's war in Ukraine and rising competition with China. Mr. Stoltenberg earlier called on Seoul to provide direct military support to Kyiv.
If you don't want autocracy and tyranny to win, then they need weapons. That's the reality.
South Korea has signed major deals providing hundreds of tanks, aircraft and other weapons to NATO member Poland. But President Yoon Suk-yeol says a South Korean law forbids supplying weapons to countries engaged in conflict, making it difficult to send arms directly to Ukraine.
For more on NATO chief's trip to Asia, we are joined by Blake Herzinger. He's a non-resident fellow at American Enterprise Institute. Thank you so much for joining us, Blake.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, we want to know, why is it important for NATO to expand its partnership with Asia, and especially the role of Japan and South Korea in this war with Ukraine?
Sure. So the NATO partnership with Japan and South Korea actually extends all the way back to the 80s and 90s. Both states are formal global partners of NATO. Both are contributing partners to the NATO Center of Excellence for Cyber Defense. And they have deep defense ties in defense trade, as you mentioned, with South Korea. And then both have exercised and supported NATO directly in operations ranging from supporting coalition ships in the Indian Ocean shortly after 9/11. And they also both support the same maritime security missions in the Gulf of Aden.
So with this trip then, what will be top of the agenda for Stoltenberg? What does he want to get out of this trip? And what does strengthening alliances and deepening ties look like in practical terms?
Sure. So you flagged already the request to South Korea to provide arms directly to Kyiv. And that is something that they've been reticent to do. And I think he pressed on President Yoon while he was there to follow the example of Germany. States like Norway and NATO applicant Sweden in bending those type of rules, because they're not the only states that have, Japan and South Korea both have laws against sending weapons directly into a conflict zone. But there are already European states that have bent those rules to support the Ukrainians. Now, there are sensitivities certainly for South Korea with Russia and sensitivities for both with the People's Republic of China in doing so.
From the Asian allies' perspective, what's in it for them? What would the stronger security links with NATO mean for the Asian allies?
Sure. So I think one of the best insights into that is during last year's Shangri-La dialogue here in Singapore, Prime Minister Kishida said, I have a strong sense of urgency that, today it's Ukraine and tomorrow it could be East Asia. And something that Secretary General Stoltenberg has emphasized on his trip so far is that the challenges that we face are not confined geographically. These are challenges to a rules-based order that South Korea, Japan, and the NATO members all support. So collaborating on things like undergirding and supporting that rules-based order, contributing to good order at sea, supporting each other on things like cyber defense is something that these states can all agree on. Japan is also the only non-European member of the G7, so there's already a lot of linkage and a lot of reason to cooperate there.
And it's clear that Stoltenberg is trying to get South Korea sort of off the fence and into the game with regards to Ukraine. You mentioned the resistance of South Korea and Japan as well when it comes to supplying arms directly. And you also mentioned countries like Germany, Sweden, and Norway are sort of bending their rules. Is South Korea in a position where they can do that, or do you think that's even possible for them?
So I think it's possible, but what I think is more likely is that they could provide more arms to European partners to free up stocks at home. So those European partners could let their own stocks go into Ukraine, while Korea maintains that sort of fig leaf of deniability that they are still upholding that their own domestic rule, but allowing the Europeans to support directly more.
China and North Korea obviously have bristled at NATO's moves. They criticized already the alliance's broadening partnership in Asia. Would it further escalate the already heightened tensions, or will it bring some peace and stability in this region?
Well, so North Korea is maybe an outlier. They've been far more bellicose on this visit, calling it the beginning of a new Cold War and saying it's bringing conflict making it more likely. And they've really slammed this visit. But the fact is that North Korea is still a rogue nuclear state threatening other nations with the use of nuclear weapons preemptively. So, that's something that generally the entire international community can get behind in condemning. With China, I think their reaction will likely be a bit more muted. There's a lot of instability internally at the moment, and I don't think Xi Jinping can afford external stability, and will be likely, they'll remark on this, but I don't think it's going to be a huge deal.
And is NATO edging closer to Japan and South Korea then also, by its mere presence, push China and North Korea closer to Russia?
I don't think so. I think Beijing has its own reasons for maintaining distance from Moscow, especially since its illegal invasion of Ukraine. North Korea certainly has been cited as providing weapons directly, supporting the Russian war effort, and that's something that is of keen interest to NATO, certainly, in getting that stopped, or at least getting the international community to observe it and condemn it. But in terms of driving them all closer together, I don't think so.
Looking forward, what would be needed for a successful sort of strategic partnership between NATO and Asian allies going forward?
Sure, I think it's a matter of identifying those areas where both have common interests, and they've done so already in areas like maritime security, cyber defense. Both states have deep defense relationships with Europe. Japan is co-developing its next-generation fighter with the United Kingdom and Italy. As we mentioned, South Korea is already selling 1,000 tanks to Poland. They're selling artillery to Poland, Norway. The Turks have based their tank on a Korean design. So there's already a lot of progress, and I think we'll just see that continue to deepen.
And with NATO sort of pushing further sort of east, talking about South Korea and Japan, is there also an intention to engage other parts of Southeast Asia, perhaps us here in this part of the world, this region of the world?
I think NATO is always eager to explore those partnerships. I think right now, in particular, the capacity is probably somewhat stretched. Dealing with a war in Europe, this is sort of NATO's reason for being, right? So their attention is rightfully focused there. So I think that really highlights the significance of Secretary General Stoltenberg's trip at this key moment. But as far as deeper engagement in Southeast Asia, I would be surprised to see it change significantly in the near future.
Blake, before we let you go, some observers have raised a question about whether a NATO-style body could be even work in Asia Pacific. What are your thoughts?
Well, we tried it already, right, with the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, and that fell apart. It's certainly a recurring complaint of Beijing and Pyongyang about starting a new Asian NATO. I don't think that's in anyone's interest. The U.S. Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, has come out and said we are not seeking an Asian NATO. And it stands to reason because I think it has to be pointed towards something. And I don't think Asia has that something right now. There is no unifying threat that they need to ally against.
Well, thank you so much, Blake, for coming in, sharing your expertise with us this morning in studio. We've been speaking with Blake Herzinger, non-resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute.